Hello everyone, this is Simon here from onshaw.net. I'm going to talk to you about set allocations and an idea I've been exploring for a little while. You may have seen me on my live stream on Substack, and this is the longer video just to explain what I was talking about. For those of you who aren't aware of the set allocations, every year the Department of Education and the NCSE release every school with an allocated number of set hours. That's the number of hours they have to teach set, and they aren't full-time posts. Some of them are, but there is usually a remainder of a few hours here and there, and it's up to schools to find partner schools to make up a full-time post. And it's become colloquially known as the cluster games. And for those of you who aren't in the game long enough to know what the reference to that is, it came out around the same time as the Hunger Games film. And the Hunger Games, as many of you will know, was a book and film where basically a load of young people were sent into a big forest, and essentially one of them is going to come out alive. And the cluster games essentially is a bit like that. All the hours are thrown into a big forest, and the principals have to go in and find a partner, and they will kill each other just to get the 25 hours. It's really unpleasant. It's really not fun, and it makes the job really stressful. I would say it is possibly the single most stressful point in a school year for a school principal, even if they don't recognize that themselves. As I've said to you on the podcast a number of times, I've had principals ring me up, despite me having no role in anything, crying because they've been let down by their neighbouring school who've just gone off and found another partner. It's very dog eat dog. It's not pleasant, and it shows it probably shows the most unpleasant part of the education system in my view, and how it structurally doesn't work. I used to be a computer programmer back in my day, but I wasn't a very good one. But since AI has come along, the idea of vibe coding has entered the sphere. And because I have a background in coding, I sort of can do vibe coding and know where things go wrong. And I've discovered a piece of software called Cursor, which basically writes code for you, instruct it, you prompt it, and you hone it, and so on. And I've been arguing the idea that the Department of Education could very easily develop a system which, when they put the set allocation hours out there, that they actually match schools up, so you don't actually have to go finding a school. And what you're seeing here is the result of a sort of a small experiment I've done. It's basically, I put all the schools from 2024 to 2025 into the system, all the set hours, and I basically got the AI to find the best possible partners. What you're seeing here is two schools in Offaly who would be ideal partners. They're mapped. You can see a line between them. You can see that there's about 9 kilometres between them, I think it is, and not too far. High Street in Offaly and Clonmacnoise in Offaly, not too far away, but one of them has 22.5 hours, one has 2.5 hours. That makes 25 hours. Perfect. And what I've done really, so I'm just going to reset this page so you can see it. It's loading. You've got all the partnerships that I was able to, were generated through this. You can pick any of them at random once you pick one. This one's a little slightly further out. I don't know if this one would work too well. There's quite a distance, and it's not perfect, obviously, but like, this is me spending a few hours finding a system where basically I was able to cluster 80, I think it's something like 85, between 85 and 90% of schools to get clusters. And only 315 schools here. And this is with not that much effort. I've put things where you can find your roll book and all the rest of it. I also added a kind of a thing though, because teaching principals get 5 hours a week for admin time, and a lot of principals are combining their set allocation with their teaching principal hours. So I did that. So in the case that all teaching principals in my thought experiment would cluster, and again, okay, it's slightly more schools, 518 without a cluster, but you can see here in County Clare, there's 3 schools. Again, I don't think that's going to work very well because of the things. Again, this is a thought experiment. People who are better at programming will be able to find easier ways of doing this. I'll pick one that might work a little better. Here's in Wexford, which doesn't have a C between it. There you go. That looks a little easier in terms of geography of how you could create a cluster fairly easily if you really wanted to. What I was interested in is like how a school might even find their spare hours. My school here, Carlow Educate Together, I would have 12. What would I need for 12 and a half spare hours? So I can click on that and it will list all the schools that had 12 and a half hours. I I'm only ticking the boxes that are unclustered. So there's very few schools that had 12 and a half that weren't clustered by my algorithm. So I could ring them up. There you go. There's a school nearby that I didn't pick up on that might work. And if I include teaching principal roles, you've got a few more as well. So there's options. Like on a program that basically took me a couple of hours to make, I'd have solved 90% of clusters more or less. Given a little better prompting, the Department of Education could very easily come up with a system where all the schools would be clustered. Schools wouldn't have to be ringing up matchmaking like Lisdoonvarna or killing each other to get them. You'd just be teamed up with a school. There wouldn't be you wouldn't be the one panicking because you might be losing a teacher to the panel. Essentially, people would be moving where the needs are, and they'd be moving into the needs of where the schools are. So they probably wouldn't be moving too far at all anyway. I know there's arguments, that people like to keep the same teachers and all the rest of it. But if the fight every year you're going to eventually lose that battle at some point. And I think if this wasn't something that you were responsible for as a principal, and the Department of Education essentially put in a prompt to team up schools as locally as possible, and in some ways it will force them to be a little bit generous. In my algorithm, for example, this is a hard 25-hour cluster. Now, I was thinking, if the Department of Education relaxed that to between 22 and a half and 25 hours, I would say every school would be clustered. You get that down from 315 schools down to close to, maybe there would be a handful of schools, and maybe they could go further again, and maybe between 20 and 25 hours. You could see if the Department of Education were in charge of actually managing this, you would see that hard 25-hour limit being stretched. I would say there would be a bit more generosity. And I think if we include teaching principals in this, again, you would find this working quite well, the clusters. So rather than having two sets of clusters, all of a sudden you've got quite a nice system that the department can lead on. As I said, I built this in about 2.5, 3 hours of actual coding with, number one, a very hard, strict 25-hour limit, so you can only make up 25 hours, and with very little prompting. Without essentially, in my thing, it basically says that it searches by county first, so it matches you up with someone in your county, and if it can't find someone in your county, it stretches out maybe 20 kilometers outside your county. Now, I think the Department of Education can do a lot better with that. They have somebody working on this longer than I would have, and I think they could actually do the clustering for us. I think they could do it in such a way that if you're nearly at 25 hours, they could up it to a 25-hour full-time post. I think they can decide who the base school is. I think it would mean, yes, the downside is some schools would lose a base teacher to the panel, but I think, look, this happens anyway. So I don't know what you think. This is a prototype idea. It's not online. It's not an online thing. It's an offline entity, so you can't play with it yourself. If you are interested, though, you can send me a message, and I'd very happily show you what this would have done for you back last year, and maybe there was a school you would have. Obviously, just to finish off, the Set Allocation Cluster Finder, developed by Paul O'Dwyer, is available to you and should be available to you again this year to find schools that are available to you. I might do something to complement that. Probably, I don't know. It'll depend on time. But as I said, the 2026-2027 set allocations are imminent. And this is me just throwing my hat in the ring to look at, there must be a better way than the cluster games. So that's my pitch for today. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.